Ah, the wastelands of Siberia. As you all may know, Russia has had a rework for quite a while now, but I've seen very few people actually go and play as the Far Eastern Army breakaway state. But I mean, I can't really blame them. Who wants to play in Siberia? Well, to answer my own question, it's going to be me. Now, I know this is going to be a struggle, but before we can even play as Siberia, we're going to have to start out as our neighbor Mongolia, as we bide our time waiting for our rebellion to kick off. However, we have a ton of things we can do before going to war. As Mongolia, we get a ton of buffs with cavalry divisions. Not to mention we can have Mongolia invade Russia, coinciding with our rebellion, just to make things a little easier. Now, starting off, we only really have a few things we can do here. One of those things being is domestic issues, as bandits are currently raiding the western countryside, and even more embarrassing for us, they were taking out our own garrisons, and even taking out our own militias. Things were not looking good for Sternberg here. However, with just taking a few decisions, and going down the focus tree, we were able to defeat the rebellion, and bring peace to Mongolia, at least for now. Oh wait, did I say peace? Because immediately the Tibetans go and invade the Ma clique. And of course, us being Mongolians, we immediately seize on the initiative and declare war. However, after only a week of fighting, the Ma clique pressed for peace. I only accepted because there wasn't much else I could get out of them. Up to this point though, we had pretty much done everything we wanted with Mongolia. We had achieved most of the borders we wanted here. And for now, we were just going to focus most of our troops up on Russia now and trying to build up as much cavalry divisions as we could. And while we were waiting, I went and sent more divisions to try to help out the Reichspakt members as much as possible, which may be weird knowing that I'm going to try to receive as much help as I can from Japan. But that's the great thing about being a rebellion state. All you need is guns and men. There is no such thing as loyalty in this game. However, things were not looking good for Japan. They had gone and invaded all of China, even the Fengtian government, which is usually with them. But alas, they were now getting bogged down in China. Only time could tell if Japan was going to actually come out on top. But just looking at their situation, I wasn't too confident in the Japanese army. But Japan was the least of my worries. The Second Weltkrieg had just begun, with the Russians starting a full-scale invasion into the Reichspakt. And at this point in the game, this is where things were going to get a little crazy. And before the Far Eastern Army could rebel against Russia, I went and clicked one last decision to attack socialist Russia. And finally, the Far East had rebelled. And now it was my job to take control of the Far Eastern Army and hope to bring Russia back to its former glory. And as in former glory, I mean back to the days of the Tsar. We were going to be restoring the Russian Tsar to the throne. But in order to do that, we were going to have to sway the balance of power towards the empire and put our boy Dederix into power. And in order to do all of that, we are going to have to oust Semyonov at some point. But for now, our biggest worry was Siberia. We had to take as much land as possible before the Russians could arrive. And also worth mentioning was the Japanese, as they were funding most of our campaign here, as they had a lot of expectations for us to fill. As we captured more territory, we're going to have to lease out some of our resources. Things were not going to be easy. And also worth mentioning, the supplies were terrible. I knew the supplies were going to be bad out here with most of the infrastructure being non-existent, but holy crap, did it take forever just for my divisions to move from one tile to the next. And while on top of all the supply issues, we were going to have to deal with a lot of decision making as we wanted the balance of power to lean towards Dederix. And while on top of all of that, I was keeping an eye on Europe as things were looking a little shaky here with the German Empire. Ukraine had lost about half of its territory by now. But up to this point, we were doing somewhat well here in the Far East. Supplies were starting to improve, and we even got some small encirclements here and there. But one of our first big problems finally hit us. We were out of men. Yes, I know, as Russia, we were out of manpower. We were going to have to be as conservative as possible with our manpower going from here. And while there was a spy found in Semyonov's staff, we had completely cut off some of Russia's eastern divisions. As anything north was impenetrable, surely things could only get better from here, right? Well, instead of foreshadowing myself the entire time, we just found a bunch of men sitting around in labor camps, so we might as well put them to some good use. And also, I have to say, these Japanese favor decisions are the only way we're winning this war right now, as we need as much guns and artillery as possible. And also, thankfully, here in the Western Front, Germany was still holding on. Hopefully, they take out France here soon so they can focus all their men on Russia, but let's not get too ahead of ourselves. because our boy Semyonov was leasing out all of our resources to Japan like it was nothing. Semyonov's grip on the country would only diminish from here. But also this national spirit of army of bandits is absolutely devastating our country. We already don't have any manpower, and we're losing weekly manpower, and it's destroying our organization and planning. We had to get rid of this. But back to the front line, we did have a lot of encirclements, but there was literally no supply. So we could barely encircle these divisions without taking high casualties ourselves. It was almost not worth it. But also to fulfill our Siberian expectations, I had to choose any territory's resources to lease over to the Japanese. So I chose Northern Sakhalin as there was only 3 oil. And looking at my divisions, I don't think we were going to need any of that. But with most of my encircling being done in the north, I set my front line to the west, hoping to make some gains. But up to this point, working with the Cossacks was becoming a serious problem. They were raiding the countryside and would not listen to any orders given by Dederix. But with one last click of a decision, we get a stab in the back. And with that, our boy Dederix overthrows Semyonov and takes full control of the country. And us being so merciful, we let Semyonov continue to be a general. And with Dederix in power, we could finally declare for the War of Restoration. That is, the restoration of the Tsar, of course. But looking back here in the west, things were not looking the greatest. Ukraine had been split in 2. We were really going to have to get the ball rolling here, in case the Germans wouldn't make it. But also, since this is a war of religion too, we replaced the Patriarch of Moscow with our own Holy Synod, and we choose our boy Afonso because he gives us a ton of manpower which we desperately need. But also, while pushing west, I've been building a bunch of infrastructure and railways just to keep up with them. But luckily for us, Paris did fall to the Germans. It would only be a matter of time until France had fallen, and then hopefully Germany would be able to focus all their manpower on Russia next. But just taking a quick look at our casualties here, they weren't looking too great. Granted, we were only around 200k, but we had no manpower to begin with. I wouldn't be surprised if most of our divisions were made up of literal teenagers. Also worth mentioning, our friend Mongolia did end up at war with the Northwest China Political Council, whatever that is. But luckily they did get a separate peace deal with them, they only lost a little bit of land. Unfortunately for us though, we were starting to near the end of our focus tree here, at least for now. Up to this point, we pretty much got every buff we can get. We just need to finish the Civil War now. But I'd be lying to you if I said things didn't look a little bleak right now, but we're doing okay. But hey, at least France was getting mopped up. Most of the French Republic was back on the mainland at this point. But hey, we got the greatest of allies. Japan goes and invades Sakhalin and takes it from us. Luckily this doesn't result in any war though, but it does suck. But luckily for us, the Germans were just about to capture Moscow. Also, funnily enough, our boy Alexander seems to have overthrown the socialists. I don't know what that's going to do, but we're still at war with them, so continue on, I guess. And after years of fighting, Moscow had fallen, and with that, so did the socialist Russians fall as well. I tried to take as much land as I could, but most of it was already taken by the Russian Republic. Whoever they are. But we did end up with most of Siberia, so I guess that's something. Now, I would say this was the end of our video, but we weren't done. Only half of Russia was conquered, with the other half ruled by another tyrant. Our job was only half done. But for now, we did get a new part of our focus tree unlocked. So for the time being, we will just go down this and try to build up a better, stronger army. And as the world event claims, peace has now been established in the West, and we will bide our sweet time in the cold Siberian countryside. Now, we did have the choice to declare a new Siberian regime, but since we went with Dederix, we only had the choice to declare a new Russian government. Which of course we were going to do anyways, else that'd be boring. But now, it's time to get serious. The other Russians had control of most of industrialized Russia. All we had was the wastelands of Siberia. They had most of the manpower, most of the factories, and were even buddy-buddy with Germany. Everything up to this point has been a cakewalk. This, however, was not going to be easy. But for now, as we bide our time, we declare a new Russian state. And we also got a nice new green. And finally, we started making our own air force too. For most of this game, all we've been playing with is cavalry. We're finally meeting the modern standards. At least for the 40s, that is. But also something to keep note of, we have this timer where we either have to end up at war with the Japanese or the other Russians, else we just collapse. That doesn't really make any sense, but hey, I guess the devs really want to get this ball moving, so we're just gonna go ahead and justify on Japan. Granted, this is more for Germany than my own sake, because they're still at war with the Japanese and they've made no successful naval invasions. It didn't take long to take all of Sakhalin, However, we were now separated by the sea with the Japanese, and I had nothing of a navy. I did try to start building some dockyards in hopes to build somewhat of a navy, but I was just wishful thinking here at this point. But I couldn't let myself get too caught up in Japan, as the other Russians were starting to look really scary with the buffs they were starting to get, and I knew war was just on the horizon. Just looking at their army and their industry in comparison to ours, things weren't looking so great. We didn't even have half the factories they did. It was embarrassing. But things weren't getting better with Japan as they were constantly naval invading us. I was able to take back everything, but for now I was going to have to set up coast guards and leave this war to the side, as I now had to start focusing on the Russians. Now I could declare war on them myself, but however I was going to wait on them to declare war so they could take the stability hit. And also, just so you know, the Germans and the Entente still haven't taken back mainland Britain. At this point it was probably just going to be a forever war. But hey, enough talking, because we just received an ultimatum from Moscow. And of course we're going to say no. And with that, we are now officially at war with the Russian Republic. This would now be the War of National Reclamation. After this, there would be no more wars, and Russia would be unified, and hopefully it would be under our banner. Now, I would be lying to you if I said I wasn't a little scared here. They had a way bigger military than us, a way bigger manpower pool, and way more factories than us. This was going to be an impossible achievement. And also, sadly enough, we already had to go scraping the barrel, as there was legit no men left in this country. It was really a race against time at this point. I had to start industrializing fast. Luckily for us though, the Russians did stop pushing. It was mainly just a stalemate at this point, but little did the other Russians know they could easily push us, but for some reason they weren't, so I'll take it. I have to say though, I am really jealous of the Russian Republic. They still have so much more left of a focus tree, whereas we're practically done with ours. They still have more bonuses to come in. Kaiserreich really did my boy Dederix dirty here. But alas, we would just have to push on without any bonuses. Granted, we did have a better kill to death ratio, but mind you, their population was probably 10 times ours, if not more. We were lucky enough to cheese the AI a little bit, as they left a lot of pockets just open, but as you can see, our supplies was non-existent, so we were moving at a snail's pace. But with some freshly new built supply hubs, we were able to fix that issue, and we were just taking it one small encirclement at a time. However, even with every encirclement we would also take about half the damage. I don't know what these Russians were on, but they were tearing through us. But once again, the AI being super dumb just left a bunch of pockets open. I was even able to get some pretty hefty encirclements in there. I actually felt like we had a chance now at winning, at least with the way things were going. Okay, I really gotta stop that. But once again, I was able to exploit the AI as they just left more pockets open. I was looking at a really big encirclement here. And finally, after a while, I was able to break their lines and get a huge encirclement. This may have been the encirclement that would win us the game. However, it was going to be costly, as every encirclement I took, I would take massive amounts of damage. But not long after, I was able to clean up most of the divisions here. And our kill to death ratio was looking pretty good, but once again, those casualties were way too high for us. But after that pocket was cleaned up a little bit, I was cocky and decided to battle plan here for a little bit. Things were looking up for us. And even our air was winning on the battlefield, which was surprising to say the least. But all good things do come to an end. I was able to take some more territories, which I could later core to get some more manpower, but I was going to have to stop our offensive for the time being, as the Russians had reinforced their border. Also, our supplies wasn't looking the greatest, so I really had to start buying from other nations for equipment. Also, quick shout out to Iran, as they've just been going batshit crazy this entire game. They're about to take all of Central Asia, and they're about to take out Egypt as well. But taking another look at the other Russia's manpower and industry, things were starting to improve a little bit, but they were still far beyond us. Things were a little bleak. But hey, they abandoned their front line again, so more pushing for us. But even with the minorest of pushes, I was burning through equipment. I had to go back to the market just to get more supplies. But in the meantime, we were getting more encirclements here, so things were doing okay-ish. We were even able to get another huge encirclement. Not as big as the last one, but it was still relatively sizable. But mind you, while I was doing all of this, I was having to build up as much infrastructure and military factories as possible just to keep up. Most of these tiles had only one infrastructure, so the supplies was almost non-existent. Also, just a quick update on the east, the Japanese are still naval invading. Yay. And while all that's been happening, I have been keeping a close eye on the other Russians. Our industry and military gap was starting to dwindle a little bit, but I was starting to run dry. But hey, our air couldn't be any greener, so that's something. But for the first time in years, the other Russians actually started going on the offensive, and it was starting to look a little scary as I didn't have much manpower to just burn. Our casualty ratio wasn't starting to look that impressive anymore too. Also, we are quite literally running out of room to build anything at this point. Things were getting a little insane. But hey, even with all the insanity, I still got it with these encirclements. And just a reminder to everyone, I've been done with my focus tree for a while now. The other third is locked until I take Moscow. Also, I have to say this game's getting a little annoying now. The US has still stayed neutral. Germany and the Entente are still at war with Britain. And Germany was still fighting Japan. Which also, yes, the naval invasions have not stopped. And sadly, this naval invasion would not go out easily, as I was just stuck with a few divisions to try and defend. Luckily though, the Russian AI was still incompetent, as they were still leaving no divisions on tiles. And after fighting the Japanese for a while to get them off the mainland, they come in with another naval invasion. I knew I was going to have to hold defensive positions at this point. There was no retaking it. For the time being, Vladivostok was in Japanese hands. But surely the Germans would take out the Japanese at some point, right? But unfortunately for us, with all the buffs the Russian Republic was getting, they were now building industry at a way faster rate than we could ever dream of. So their industry was about triple ours now at this point. Things were getting dark. At this point, this was my last shot. I needed to focus all of my attention onto Russia before they could build up even more. So that's when I went on the offensive against Japan, trying to kick them off the mainland. We were seeing some initial success here, cutting the Japanese divisions in two, even kicking them all the way back to North Sakhalin. But before I could push them out of Sakhalin, I received report that there was another Japanese naval invasion. This was ridiculous. I was even starting to struggle with supplies as I couldn't push them all the way out of Sakhalin. At this point I was praying the Reichspakt could pull out some bullshit reason to invade Russia, but sadly they were doing nothing as they were still at war with Britain. But luckily for us, Japan decided to leave their entire front line open for some reason, so I seized on the initiative and went on the offensive, trying to take back all the land before Japan could arrive again. And we were seeing some rapid success. However, sadly the Japanese quickly arrived back, trying to recover whatever they had lost. And soon I could no longer push. But don't you worry, dear viewer, as the stalemate would not last very long, as the Japanese quickly went on the offensive. They were overrunning our divisions like crazy. Our supplies were terrible, and we were running out of equipment. Also, I forgot to mention, with our equipment supplies being so low, the enemies would just run into our divisions and they would disappear. We could not hold the front line any longer. But just looking at the state of the world, with the US still staying neutral, the Entente and the Reichspakt still at war with Britain, and Germany still at war with Japan, things were going nowhere. But okay guys, I think I'm going to call it. My lines were only continuing to collapse by the Japanese, not to mention the game kept crashing at this point. So I'm just going to go ahead and say I'm done. I sadly could not unite all of Russia or restore the Tsar as I had promised. But who knows, maybe one day I'll return to the Far East and restore the Russian Tsar and unite Russia under one banner. But hey, that's all I got. See ya.
The thug shaker. Give me the thug shaker, dude.